Season passes are a staple in modern video gaming, a tool designed to provide additional content for the consumer, a reason to keep the games you buy rather than sell them on eBay. Historically, I avoid them like the plague, but there have been exceptions where the DLC included is well worth the price of admission. Following my Evil Within video, you can find that here if you haven't seen it yet, I was left with a game I loved playing, but one that felt incomplete. So when I saw the Season Pass follow Detective Kidman and would unravel the mystery behind Mobius, I knew I had to give it a shot. Developed by Tango Gameworks and published by Bethesda, the Season Pass released on the 10th of March 2015 with subsequent drops in the following 2 months. It's split into 3 parts: the assignment, the consequence, and the executioner. The assignment and the consequence are 2 chapters each of the same story, and as such, I'll cover them as a single entity before looping back to the executioner. During the course of this review, I'll explain what works, what doesn't, and ultimately, if this Season Pass is essential playing or essentially pointless. And it's important to note here, this review I will be going through full spoilers. So let's dive in. Starting before the events of the base game and running alongside it, we play as Julie Kidman, a junior detective to the KCPD and partner of Sebastian Castellanos and Joseph Oda. We learn that Kidman was rescued from the gutter by Mobius, providing her with her own apartment and a job at the KCPD, and in exchange, she becomes an agent for them, serving their purposes above all others and ensuring she keeps Sebastian off their tracks. So who are Mobius, and what are their plans for STEM? This was a major issue for me in the base game, but here, it's finally answered. Mobius are a secret organization that have major influence on the world stage. Think of them like the Illuminati, pulling all the strings from the shadows. And their plan is to use STEM to influence entire populations to make them bow down to their will. Truly evil stuff. So what else do we learn? Mobius worked with Jimenez and Rubin to fund the creation of STEM. They were unhappy working with somebody as damaged as Rubin, and so to make himself indispensable, Rubin geared the machine so it would only work with his brainwaves. This didn't stop Mobius, and so, upon the project's completion, they eliminated him and stuck his brain in the center of the machine. Unfortunately, we know how insane Rubin really is, and even in death, his brainwaves are still enough to control STEM, inflicting untold horror upon anyone plugged into the system. So how did they hope to fix this? Leslie is a match for Rubin's brainwaves based on trauma he experienced in his life, and so, if they can get Leslie, they can whip his brain out, bin off Rubin, and chuck it in, and they'll have no one to stop them. The plot is insane, but at least I now understand it. And that's not the only thing that I wanted to know over the course of the base game. How did everyone get in STEM if you need to be physically plugged into it? Well, the answer, it's wireless. The high-pitched ringing you hear is your subconscious being linked to the system. I was so happy to have all these blanks filled in, and I'm glad to say the delivery of this, with Kidman seeing the danger that would be unleashed if Leslie was allowed to live, and fighting against her orders from Mobius, was engaging from start to end. Told through cutscenes, file pickups, and audio diaries, the story is not only acted incredibly well from its cast, it's also visually engaging. Locations change frequently, from the familiar locales of the base game to the cold, sterile offices of Mobius, and in switching between these, the game doesn't feel like it's retreading old ground. It feels like it has something fresh to show you at every turn, and nowhere is this more apparent than the gameplay itself. In a complete change from the base game, here, Kidman is weaponless for the vast majority of the DLC, instead relying purely on stealth to get through the horrors that await her around every corner. In the base game, you could crouch, throw bottles to lure enemies, and hide in lockers when it all got a bit chaotic. Now all of that returns, but here, Kidman can snap to cover and lure enemies with a quick shout. Woohoo! And that's not all. She can also use the environment to her advantage, ring in phones to lure an enemy to a location and then lock them in place, or yell out to bring them into the path of a trap. Sneaking around the environment and running when you're spotted with no real way to defend yourself is usually a turn-off for me when it comes to horror games. Games like Outlast or the myriad of clones that spawned in its wake aren't my cup of tea. I like to know I can engage with a threat if I want to, even if the outcome results in certain death. And that is why I'm so surprised that I loved this. It felt more like I was playing Metal Gear than I was in a horror game. Now, don't get me wrong, I was khaki my pants in most scenarios, but I felt like I was actually in control. In part, this is due to the AI being essentially blind as soon as you enter cover, and so figuring out a route across an environment, luring enemies here, throwing bottles there. It was more like a puzzle rather than a trial and error reset fest, which it could have easily turned into. You normally enter an area and can assess the threat in front of you before moving through the environment. It doesn't throw enemies randomly your way. It makes it very clear what you're about to deal with, and in its simplicity, it succeeds. When things went wrong, and they did, I knew it was on me. Now with any game, there's only so long you can do the same thing over and over again until you get bored. Fortunately, Tango Gameworks knew this, and so, to spice things up, you'll go into an area without enemies, and it's here you get either story exposition or puzzles. These puzzles come in a few forms. They'll either be lights you need to activate in a particular sequence, dials which are covered in blood which hint at the code, or you'll need to find the answer around the environment. Using the flashlight, you can focus the light using L2, and with this, it'll reveal secrets. Either codes or sometimes whole new rooms for you to get even more lore or another puzzle. I found myself constantly walking around scanning the environment in hopes of uncovering more secrets. With each safe you solve, you get parts of a torn letter, and when you have all of the parts, you can put it together and get a final chunk of lore. The puzzles are not only a great inclusion in keeping the experience engaging, I found them well designed and unique enough from each other to never become tedious. But sometimes, you need a little pizzazz, a little bit of spice to up the stakes and rise the tension. Sometimes, you need a boss battle. Throughout the 2 DLCs, you're pursued by a lamp with lady legs. It's the kind of creature that Disney send after you if you pirate any of Pixar's work. Shade, as it's aptly known, sets up for the cinematic moments that pepper the first 3 chapters. One moment you'll be waiting for an elevator to arrive while dodging its line of sight, and the next, you're trapped in the rubble, frantically reaching for a pistol before blowing away tons of enemies. It's heart-pounding stuff that had me on the edge of my seat, and when you finally get a chance to pump her full of loads of ammo, it's truly satisfying. The other bosses across the game, in Joseph, the copies of yourself, and the administrator, are all unique from each other, and they're all a joy to overcome. Within a few moments, you'll know what you have to do and how to beat it, and as the game gives you respawning ammo and health which recovers if you stay still for a while, there isn't the same frustration I had with a few of the bosses in the base game. It's overall a much easier experience, and that's the same for the rest of the game. Now, there's pros and cons to this. In structuring everything around stealth, it feels very linear, which in turn ups the pacing, but strips away the choice and the self-doubt that comes from resource management. You never have to wonder if you've made a right or wrong choice, as there really isn't any. If you go into this expecting to have a survival horror experience like the base game, you may be disappointed here, but for me, I felt it worked on nearly every level. The stealth was simple, yet satisfying, the bosses were memorable, and the plot was essential. In fact, my only critique with the assignment and the consequence are that this shouldn't have been sold separately. To understand the entire plot of The Evil Within, you need to play this. Cutting this content out and selling it as 2 separate packs feels dirty. The amount of people that must have completed the base game and never gone back for this must be massive. And that's a damn shame, as they're missing out on the piece of content that ties the entire game together. If you've been putting off playing this for whatever reason, I encourage you to put aside 5 hours and get it done. It was a joy from start to end. Now I wish I could say that about the Executioner. Oh god, here we go. You know the Keeper. He's the enemy with a safer ahead. At any point in the base game, did you ever think, God, I wish I could play as him? No, no one did, but they decided to give it to us anyway. It's such a weird mode. For starters, there's a plot. Of course there is. It's the story of a dad who enters STEM to bring back his daughter, but does so in the body of a Keeper. The game is essentially this. You enter a room, kill all the enemies, follow a ghost of your daughter, read her notes, and repeat this for an hour. There's no voice work, there's 2 really basic cutscenes, and there's no new enemies. The story is so bare bones and pointless, I don't even know why they even bothered to try. The gameplay fares a little better. Shifting to a first-person perspective, you go on a power trip. Enemies are pure fodder. You start with the Keeper's giant hammer and some barbed wire mines. With these, you hit an enemy a couple of times and then get an option to either execute, in frankly a cool animation, or throw them. Chucking enemies into hazards in the environment or at each other is pretty cool. It's not just enemies you can throw either. It gives you the option to live out all your WWE fantasies. When you kill enemies, you earn coins. These coins can be used to upgrade your stats or buy new gear. Now, as the story progresses, you unlock new tools such as chainsaws, RPGs, and Molotovs, which you can then use to inflict some extra punishment on the poor bastards that are having to fight against you. You move from one room to another to get to the next boss encounter, and if you want, you can take on some extra areas called torments, which are side arenas with stacks of enemies. Here, you can earn a decent amount of loot to go and spend on the upgrades, if you really care enough. The issue is, it's incredibly easy, and 30 minutes in, I was bored as all hell, until I made one change.
Think we'll go with a little Bohemian Rhapsody, gentlemen?
Good call.
This change saved it for me. The Executioner became a shit version of Doom, but with melee combat. It was enough to carry me through the rest of the mode, but without any kind of challenge and an uninteresting plot, I can't recommend it to anyone. Recommending the Season Pass content included here is a tough one. On one hand, the assignment and the consequence were exactly what I wanted. They filled in all the blanks I had for the base game, and even set up a sequel with the introduction of Myra. It was a joy to play through, but I can't shake the feeling that this content was purposely cut from development to add it into a mandated season pass by parent company Bethesda, and that rubs me up the wrong way. Now, I could be wrong, and this DLC was developed in response to criticism on the main plot, but I doubt it. Now, if I put that to the side, at $20 on its release, the Season Pass is good value for what is 5 hours of genuinely great content, and if you go back to this now, you can grab it for half price on console, and as low as $1.99 on PC, and for that, it's a no-brainer. The Executioner may be throwaway trash, solely there to pad out a Season Pass graphic, but that's not the draw here. The draw is getting a complete story. And that's it for this review. If you enjoyed it, put a like on it and consider subscribing for more from the evil within. I try to respond to everyone on my channel, so let me know your thoughts on the season pass down in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you. Up next on the channel is a review on the Evil Within 2 before I move on to the next series, Dead Space. Now if you still want a little bit more from me, consider checking out my podcast, In PS We Trust. It's a fortnightly PlayStation podcast where me and my co-host crack a few beers and discuss the latest news, rumours and hype for all things PlayStation. I'll have links in the description. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. See ya.